Chapter 40. Homeward, eventually. They stayed in Aurelia another week before the carriage turned back toward Ashenreach. Long enough for Kael to sit through an uncomfortable but genuinely useful debrief with a guild archivist about the historical machinist fragments. Long enough for Wren to finish her dessert ranking. The honeyed fig tart held on to the top spot through several serious challengers. Long enough for Ileana Kestrel to track him down at the training courtyard one final time before they left. "You're actually going back," she said, arms crossed, something almost disappointed in her voice. "To the provinces. After all that, it's not the provinces. It's home. You could train here. Properly. Full academy resources. The panels already discussed it. Marrow specifically." She studied him, and for once the sharp evaluation in her expression had something gentler underneath it. "I don't fully understand why you'd choose a scrapyard over that." "Because the scrapyard's where I actually became someone worth training," Kael said, and found he meant it completely. "The academy can teach me things I don't know yet, but it didn't build me. I'd rather grow from where I actually started than pretend I started somewhere more impressive." Ileana was quiet for a moment, then, unexpectedly, extended a hand. "Write to me. When something interesting happens out there. I want updates on the class. Every capital adjudicator's suddenly desperate to study. Something interesting happens roughly every week where I'm from." "Then you'd better write often," Ileana said, and the handshake, when it came, was firm and genuine. The closing of one kind of rivalry and the quiet opening of something better. Seraphine found him the night before departure, in the Solari house's small garden, and sat beside him without asking. The way she'd stopped bothering to ask months ago. "Your grandmother's going to miss you terribly," she said. "I know. I already promised to write. Actual letters. Not the guild official kind." He glanced at her sideways. "Your father let you come all this way, just to observe a hearing?" "My father," Seraphine said, dryly, "understood that I was coming regardless of what he let me do, and decided it was more dignified to authorize it officially." A pause, and then, quieter, more honest than her usual careful poise allowed. "I wanted to see it. All of it. The version of you that exists outside Ashenreach, where nobody already had an opinion about who you were supposed to be." She looked at him directly. "I think I like this version just as much as the one back home." "For what that's worth." "It's worth quite a lot, actually," Kael said. And the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable at all. The road back to Ashenreach felt shorter than the road out, the way return trips always did. And Kael spent most of it with his mother's journal, copied carefully by Ophelia's own hand, the original left safely in the Solari library, sitting in his lap alongside a formal guild letter confirming adjudicator Marrow's promised review into the 15-year-old denied oversight request. "Halden's going to want to see this the moment we're back," Corvina said, watching him read it for the third time. "You realize this isn't over. If someone really did suppress a legitimate safety concern 15 years ago, finding out who and why is going to take time. Possibly a great deal of it, I know." Kael closed the journal carefully. "I'm not in a hurry anymore. I spent 15 years not knowing anything at all. I can spend a little longer finding this out properly, instead of rushing it and getting it wrong." A genuinely mature conclusion, operator. I want that noted for the record. You keep saying things like that, like I'm going to forget you said them. I say them because they are true, and because I suspect, someday, you will want to remember exactly when you started earning them. Ashenreach's valley came into view on the 9th evening, the familiar dark smudge of the Ashwood Deep crowding its western edge exactly as it always had. And Kael, leaning out the carriage window, with Wren asleep against his shoulder, and a B-rank registry entry with his name permanently attached to it, somewhere in a guild archive 200 miles behind him, felt something settle into place that had nothing to do with rank or classification or anything the capital had given him. He felt like he was coming home, both of them, at once, the way his grandmother had promised him he was finally allowed to. The scrapyard gate was still standing exactly where he'd left it, so, he suspected, was an entire graveyard of badly named machines, patiently waiting for their operator to come back and build a few dozen more. Chapter 41. Home again. Ashen Reach had changed exactly as much as Kael expected, which was to say, not remotely enough, and precisely the right amount. The market square still smelled like wood smoke and river fish. The clock tower still didn't chime quite right, though Kael noted, with a small private satisfaction, that his idler gear fix from months ago had at least held. What had changed was the way people looked at him now. Not the wide-eyed gawking he'd half dreaded, but something quieter, sturdier, nods from people who'd never bothered with him before. A genuine round of applause from the market stallholders when word spread that the carriage was back. Denner meeting him at the outpost gate with a formal guild folder under one arm, and an expression that was trying very hard to stay professional and failing. E rank, permanent registry entry, first new class taxonomy in a century, Denner said, scratching his neck. You know how much paperwork that generates? I've got a folder for you that's thicker than your entire prior file. Congratulations, I suppose. Also, I'm sorry in advance. Fenn didn't say much at all when Kael walked through the scrapyard gate. Just looked him over, once, head to toe, the way he'd looked at every piece of half-broken machinery that had ever come through this yard, checking for damage. You're taller, Fenn said, finally, which Kael was fairly sure wasn't true, and which he understood anyway to mean something much larger than height. Missed you too. Is that so? Fenn's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile, and he turned to shuffle a stack of scrap toward the workbench, which Kael recognized, by now, as the closest thing to an embrace the man was ever going to offer. Your workbench is exactly where you left it. So's the graveyard. 28 of them, all named the same fool thing. I didn't touch any of it. You could have cleared some space. Didn't feel right to. Bryce found him an hour later, leaner than Kael remembered, a fresh scar along one forearm, from what Kael would learn later, had been a genuinely difficult second-ring patrol he'd volunteered for during the month Kael was away. And the greeting, when it came, was rougher and more honest than anything either of them would have managed 6 months earlier. You're back, Bryce said. Good. I've been training with a real spearmaster, capital trained, apparently borrowed from some noble house's private guard. I want to see if I've actually gotten better. And there's nobody in this town who'll actually push back hard enough to tell me that an invitation. It's a challenge. Don't read into it more than that. Kael, looking at the scar, and the new steadiness in Bryce's stance, and the particular awkward pride underneath the bluntness, found himself grinning despite everything. Tomorrow, he said, give me one night to actually sleep in my own bed first. That night, alone in the scrapyard, Kael sat at the workbench with Corvina's copy of his mother's journal, Holden's promised guild folder, and a growing list, started somewhere on the road home and added to almost daily since, of every question the capital hadn't answered. Welcome home, operator, Ashen said quietly, once the scrapyard had gone fully dark and quiet around them. For what it is worth, I find I prefer this workshop to every room the capital had to offer. I do not fully understand why. I suspect it has something to do with you. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Do not grow accustomed to it. Now, shall we begin the investigation properly, or would you prefer to sleep first, as promised? Kael looked at the folder and the journal, and old Scuttle keeping its dented, patient watch from the windowsill, and made his choice. Sleep first, he said. Tomorrow we start pulling threads. Chapter 42. The investigation opens. Holden convened them in the outpost's back records room 3 days later. Kael, Denner, and a stack of district paperwork so old The ink had gone brown at the edges, cross-referenced against the guild folder Merrow's office had forwarded from the capital. Adjudicator Merrow's review is official, but it's slow, Holden said, spreading the documents across the table. Capital bureaucracy on a 15-year-old case isn't going to move fast, and I don't want to sit on our hands waiting. Denner's pulled every district oversight request from that season he could find. We start there. It took most of the afternoon, Denner squinting at faded requisition stamps, Kael cross-referencing dates against his mother's journal entries, before Denner finally sat back with a low whistle. Here, he said, sliding a single sheet across the table. Oversight request, filed by I, Solari. Denied same week. Signed off by the district guild commander at the time. He tapped the signature at the bottom, a tight, looping scrawl that had faded but not vanished. Commander Osric Dre ran this district's guild post for about 6 years before your mother's expedition. Transferred out less than a month after the Rift event. Capital posting. Talent Division resource allocation, if my memory of old outpost gossip serves. Talent Division, Kael repeated slowly. The same division that ran my classification hearing. Same one, Holden confirmed, her expression going carefully neutral in the specific way Kael had learned meant she was thinking something she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Different office within it, as far as I know, but it's not nothing. A district commander denies a legitimate safety concern. A catastrophic rift kills 2 researchers and displaces their infant son. And a month later, that commander gets a comfortable promotion 200 miles away from the scene. She tapped the signature. That's either a very unlucky coincidence, or it's exactly what your mother's journal thought it was. I would add one further observation, unprompted, Ashen said quietly, for Kael's ears alone. Osric Dre produces no match in my own fragmentary archive, but the timing of his transfer, combined with the timing of my own dormancy beginning in this exact district. I do not want to overstate a connection I cannot confirm. I only want to note that I have stopped believing, fully, in coincidences this convenient. He's still active, Kael said out loud. Still in the talent division. That means he's still got influence over exactly the kind of review that's supposed to be investigating him. It does, Holden agreed grimly, which means this stays quiet, careful, and thoroughly documented before it goes anywhere near Merrow's office again. If Dre gets wind of an active inquiry before we've built something solid, a man with 15 years of practice covering his tracks isn't going to leave us anything left to find. Denner scratched his neck, staring at the faded signature like it might rearrange itself into something less complicated. Well, he said, guess we know what we're doing with our evenings for a while. Chapter 43. Wren's turn. Nobody noticed it happening at first, least of all Wren, which was, Kael would think later, exactly the kind of quietly stubborn way she'd do something extraordinary, without announcing it, without making it anyone else's business, until it was already well underway. It started with the old district paperwork. Wren had inserted herself into the investigation from day one, on the grounds that somebody in this operation should actually be good at reading 15-year-old handwriting instead of squinting at it dramatically, and spent most evenings at the outpost's records room, transcribing faded requisition slips into clean, legible copies for Halden's growing case file. This one's got a watermark under the ink, she said one evening, holding a brittle old expedition manifest up to the lamp with a frown. Not decorative. Structural. Like there's something written under what's actually written. Old guild paper sometimes used residue-treated stock for sensitive documents, Denner said, distracted, 3 pages into a different file. Supposed to be tamper-resistant. Nobody's used it in years. Too expensive. Wren stared at the manifest a moment longer, and then did something none of them, including her, entirely expected. She reached out and touched the paper directly, the way Kael touched machines, and went very still. I can, she started, and stopped, blinking hard. There's something under here. I can almost... System notification. Extreme circumstance evolution triggered. Class reawakened. Chronicler. Base class retained. Scribe. F rank. Now foundational subskill. New aptitude unlocked. Residue reading. May perceive aether-encoded information layered beneath conventional writing, including deliberately obscured or corrupted records. Wren dropped the manifest like it had bitten her. Breathing hard, staring at her own hands with an expression Kael recognized immediately, because he'd worn it himself once in a dark scrapyard, 3 months and a lifetime ago. I just read something that isn't on the page, she said, voice shaking. There's a second signature under Dre's. Smudged, deliberately, I think. But it's there. Kael, I think I just found something nobody was supposed to find. Confirmed, Ashen said, quiet and clearly startled, which was rare enough that Kael actually paused. I did not anticipate this. Wren Cabot's aether signature has shifted substantially. This appears to be a genuine class reawakening, parallel to your own, though the mechanism differs. You're a chronicler, Kael said, still processing it himself. Wren, do you have any idea how rare that sounds? I have no idea what it means at all, is what I have, Wren said, half laughing, half terrified, staring at her trembling hands. I touched a piece of paper, and now I can apparently read secrets out of it. This is either the best day of my life, or I need to lie down. Both, Halden said, arriving in the doorway in time to catch the tail end of it. Already reading the system notification off Wren's stunned expression, like she'd seen this particular look before. Both is allowed. Also, Cabot. If that second signature is real, I need you to read every single document in this room the exact same way, starting tonight, because we may have just found our first genuine piece of proof. Wren looked down at her own hands one more time, then up at Kael. Something fierce and delighted breaking through the shock. Well, she said, guess I finally get to stop being the F rank who just carries snacks. You were never just that. I know. But it's nice to have the paperwork agree with me for once. Chapter 44. Old records. It took Wren 4 more days of careful, exhausting practice. Ashen coaching her through aether flow control the same patient way it had once coached Kael. Because apparently ancient machine intelligences were not, in fact, limited to teaching just one operator at a time. Before she could reliably read a full document, instead of catching fragments and losing them again, the second signature under Dre's, once she finally rendered it fully legible, wasn't a name Kael recognized. Denner didn't either, but Halden went very quiet, staring at it for a long moment, before she said, low and careful, "That's a talent division authorization mark, not a person's name, a departmental seal, used specifically for requests that get routed above a district commander's normal authority." Meaning Dre didn't deny that oversight request on his own judgment, Holden said. Meaning someone above him, in the Capitol, told him to, and he obscured the evidence of that instruction well enough that 15 years of ordinary review never caught it. She looked up at all of them, something grim settling into her expression. This isn't a corrupt district commander covering for a bad decision anymore. This is someone far higher up the chain, 15 years ago, deciding a legitimate safety concern about rift residue patterns needed to disappear quietly. And Dre's still in the talent division today, which means whatever protected him back then may very well still be protecting him now. Wren, exhausted, sat back from the document with a shaky breath. That's a lot bigger than I thought I was finding when I touched a piece of old paper. You did well, Holden said, genuinely. This is more than Marrow's official review has managed in weeks of proper capital channels. But it also means we need to be much more careful from here. She gathered the documents carefully, sealing them into a locked case. I'm sending this to Marrow directly, not through standard channels. And I'm not telling anyone else in this district it exists until he confirms receipt. If there's a departmental seal involved, there may be more than one person with a reason to want this to stay buried. Operator, Ashen said quietly, once the room had cleared and Kael sat alone with his thoughts. I want to be honest about something. Given how directly this now touches your own history, I do not know who authorized that seal. I do not know if it connects to whoever stripped my own designation all those years ago. Though the pattern is suggestive in a way I am now less comfortable dismissing as coincidence. A pause. What I do know is that you are getting closer to an answer your mother died trying to reach. I would ask you to move carefully, operator. Not because I doubt your capability, but because whoever is on the other end of this has already proven, once, that they were willing to let people die rather than let this be looked at closely. Kael sat with that for a long moment, his mother's careful, worried handwriting still vivid in his memory, and felt the same cold, determined resolve settle back into his chest that he'd carried since the library in Aurelia. I'll be careful, he said, but I'm not stopping. I did not expect you to. I would simply prefer you arrive at the end of this with all your limbs intact. Chapter 45. A familiar name. Kael hadn't planned to tell Seraphine about the investigation yet. Halden's caution about who knew what was still ringing in his ears. But she found out anyway. The way she found out most things, by simply noticing that something had changed in him and refusing to let it go unasked. You've had the same distracted look for a week, she said, cornering him at the scrapyard with the particular directness that had stopped surprising him months ago. Either tell me what it is, or stop pretending you're fine when you're clearly not. So he told her, carefully, in pieces, watching her face for any sign it was a mistake. It wasn't. Seraphine listened in complete silence until he reached Dre's name, at which point something flickered across her expression that made him stop entirely. Osric Dre, she repeated slowly. I know that name. How? My father mentions him occasionally. Not fondly, exactly, but with a kind of complicated respect. She frowned. Working through a memory, Kael could see her turning over carefully, the way he turned over gear ratios. They served together, early in my father's career, before he inherited the district governorship. Dre was younger then, ambitious, apparently very good at his job. My father said before that Dre's transfer to the capital, all those years ago, was a shame, but not a surprise. That he'd always had his eye on bigger things than a provincial outpost. Does your father know why he actually left? I don't know. I've never asked, because I never had a reason to. Seraphine's jaw set, something decisive settling into her expression. I'll ask him tonight. Carefully. If Dre's connected to something that got to something that killed people, Kael. My father deserves the chance to tell me what he actually remembers before this gets any further out of hand. She was true to her word. She came back to the scrapyard the next evening, quieter than Kael had ever seen her, and sat down across from him at the workbench before speaking. My father didn't know, she said finally. Not about the oversight denial specifically, but he remembered something else. That Dre's transfer came through unusually fast, faster than district postings normally moved, and that at the time, my father assumed it was simple ambition rewarded. She paused, choosing the next words with visible care. He's shaken, Kael. He liked Dre once. The idea that he might have quietly let people die to protect a promotion is not something he's taking easily. But he gave me something useful regardless. She produced a folded slip of paper, the name of the officer who processed Dre's transfer paperwork. Still alive. Retired, living 2 districts over. My father thinks he'd talk if someone asked him properly, and he offered to write the introduction himself. Kael took the paper, feeling the weight of it settle into his chest alongside everything else. His mother's suspicion, Wren's discovery, Halden's careful caution, and now Lord Alcairn's own quiet, complicated grief over a friend who might have chosen ambition over lives. "Thank you," he said, "for asking him. I know that wasn't easy." "No," Seraphine agreed. "But you didn't ask me to do it easily. You asked me to help find the truth. Those aren't always the same request." She held his gaze for a moment, something steady and certain underneath the careful, noble composure. "Whatever this turns out to be, Kael, I'm not stepping back from it now. I hope that's understood." "It's understood," Kael said, and meant it completely. Chapter 46. Training Days. They gave themselves a week before pursuing the retired officer's name any further. Halden's insistence, and a good one, given how thin everyone's nerves had worn over the past 2 weeks of careful, quiet digging, and Kael spent most of it doing the thing that had always steadied him best, building. Bryce showed up at the scrapyard on the second morning, spear slung over one shoulder, and didn't bother with a greeting beyond. "Fen said I could use the back lot. Figured if I'm sparring, might as well spar against something that actually makes me work for it. Against me, or against my constructs. Both, eventually. Start with the constructs. I want to see what a B-rank machinist's actually built up to since the last time I watched you nearly die in a field." It became, over the following days, an unexpectedly good routine. Bryce running drills against increasingly coordinated swarm formations, while Kael refined the timing and precision his drone sovereignty demanded. Wren perched on the workbench between chronicler practice sessions, calling out unhelpful commentary. Fen occasionally wandering over to grunt approval or disapproval at a new design. "Your formation's got a gap on the left flank every time you split into 3 groups, Bryce said, breathing hard after the 4th drill, jabbing his spear toward the offending scuttler cluster. "I keep getting through it. That's not me being good. That's you being predictable. Show me." Bryce showed him, twice, and Kael, grudgingly, honestly, adjusted the formation on the spot, watching the gap close on the 5th attempt with something like real satisfaction. "Huh," Bryce said. "Didn't expect you to actually take the feedback. You're not wrong just because you used to be a jerk about everything else. Fair." Bryce considered that, resetting his stance. "For what it's worth, this is better than the capital-trained spearmaster I mentioned. He corrects my form. You're making me actually think about what I'm fighting, which is a different thing entirely." He is not wrong, operator. Incorporating live combat feedback from a warrior class perspective is measurably improving your formation efficiency. I would recommend continuing this arrangement. You're basically telling me to keep being friends with Bryce for tactical reasons. I am telling you that friendship and tactical value are not mutually exclusive, and that you should perhaps stop being surprised every time the two overlap. By the end of the week, Kael had 4 new formation variants drilled into Reflex. A fresh construct design Ashen's system had quietly flagged as approaching drone sovereign, Tier 3 readiness, and, over Wren's loud ongoing protest, a 30-second new scuttler that he had, almost on instinct, named Scuttle. "You cannot keep doing this," Wren said, staring at the workbench in open despair. "You have a title now, an official guild-recognized class. You could name something Vigil or Sentinel, something with actual weight." "Scuttle has weight. Scuttle has 30 prior installments of weight. I genuinely cannot help you," Wren said, and put her head down on the workbench in defeat, directly next to old Scuttle, which patted her hair once with its front leg in what might have been sympathy and might have been mockery, and had honestly gotten hard to tell apart lately. Bryce, watching the entire exchange with open amusement, decided, wisely for once, not to get involved. Chapter 47. The Grind. It was Bryce, of all people, who turned the Deep's first ring into a routine. "Guild pays a standing bounty per core, did you know that?" he announced, arriving at the scrapyard one morning with a requisition slip and the expression of a boy who just discovered money grew on monsters. "Denner showed me the rate sheet. F-rank cores are pocket change, but E ranks add up. And you," He jabbed a finger at Kael. Can apparently use the things. So here's my proposal. Twice a week. First ring. Sanctioned cull route. Guild escort waived now that we're both cleared for it. I stab things. You do your creepy machine harvest. We split the bounty and you keep the fragments. Operator. I want to formally note that this is the single most efficient training proposal anyone has made on your behalf all season. And it came from Bryce Colder. I am recalibrating several assessments. The routine, once it settled, had a rhythm Kael came to genuinely crave. Out past the tree line by mid-morning, working the marked cull routes where duskhound strays and sandjaw nests pushed up against the boundary, Bryce's spear opening fights and Kael's constructs closing them. Cores harvested and cataloged, each one a small, glowing coin of progress he could actually hold. System notification. Cull route complete. 4 E-rank cores. 7 F-rank cores harvested. Core infusion available. 2 constructs eligible for E-grade durability upgrade. Recommendation. Efficiency compounds. So does an arsenal. It's addictive, Kael admitted. 3 weeks in, watching a freshly infused scuttler frame shrug off a spear thrust that would have shattered its predecessor. Every core makes the next hunt easier. Every hunt makes the next core cheaper. It's a flywheel. It's a job, Bryce corrected, cleaning his spear with deep satisfaction. The first one either of us has ever had that pays. Don't ruin it with engineering words. The long watcher fragment Kael had been saving. Ashen's note. Reserve it for a construct that has earned it. Had sat in the back of his mind for weeks, and there had only ever really been one candidate. He did the infusion on a quiet evening, alone at the workbench, pressing the C-grade fragment into Old Scuttle's dented casing and feeding the binding slowly, carefully. The way Ashen had taught him to do everything that mattered. The result made him laugh out loud, alone in the scrapyard, for a solid minute. Old Scuttle's scarred hide rippled and vanished, not gone. Camouflaged. The long watcher's shifting adaptive pattern flowing across its casing until the little machine was nothing but a faint shimmer and 5 points of pressure on the workbench. The deadliest ambush predator of the second ring reborn at 1/1000th scale. Remarkable, Ashen said, and it genuinely sounded like it meant it. The binding took at full efficiency. Operator. That fragment would have improved any construct in your arsenal by a measurable margin. In this one, it appears to have found something closer to a home, because it earned it, Kael said. And the invisible little machine climbed his sleeve and settled on his shoulder. A faint shimmer with an unmistakable air of promotion. Bryce's reaction, the next cull day, was everything Kael could have hoped for. A full 10 seconds of squinting at the empty workbench where he'd been told to look. Then a yelp that scattered birds off the scrapyard fence when Old Scuttle decamouflaged 6 inches from his nose. That, Bryce declared, hand on his chest, is the single worst thing you have ever built. And I want you to make me 20 of them. They were still laughing about it when Wren arrived at a run from the outpost. No laughter in her at all, and the look on her face ended the morning's easiness before she'd said a single word. Tamsin's back from the Western Patrol, she said, a day early, riding like something's chasing her. Halden wants everyone at the outpost. Now. Chapter 48. The deep stirs again. It was Tamsin who brought the warning, riding into town at a hard pace 2 days before they'd planned to approach the retired transfer officer. Dust-covered and grim in a way that immediately quieted the whole scrapyard. Second ring's gone wrong, she said, without dismounting fully. Not a beast surge. Something stranger. Patrol I was running went quiet near the deep edge of the second ring yesterday evening, the same general area where we fought the Long Watcher. When the backup team went in this morning, they found the whole patrol alive, unharmed, but disoriented. None of them could account for 6 missing hours. And the tree line past that point has started doing something none of us have ever seen it do, which is growing, Tamsin said. Not naturally. Overnight, a section of the boundary that's held steady for as long as anyone's kept records has pushed nearly 40 yards deeper into what used to be safely first ring territory. Whatever's causing it, it's close to the surface, and it's close to us. Operator, Ashen said, very quietly, very focused. I do not have historical data on boundary migration of this kind, but I would note, cautiously, that the timing is difficult to dismiss as coincidence, given how actively you have been pursuing an investigation that someone, 15 years ago, was willing to kill people to keep buried. You think this is connected? To Dre? To whoever's above him? I do not know. I want to be honest about the limits of what I can confirm. But I would ask you to consider the possibility seriously, rather than treating it as separate from everything else currently in motion. Holden, arriving at a run with Denner close behind, confirmed the worst of it within the hour. A formal guild alert already dispatched to the capital. Additional hunter reinforcements requested, and a directive delivered with visible reluctance that changed the shape of everything Kael had been quietly planning. Capital's authorizing a full second ring response team, Holden said. Guild-sanctioned, properly resourced, this time, not a controlled excursion like the Long Watcher expedition. Something's actively changing out there, and the Guild wants confirmed combat-capable awakeners on it immediately. Which means you're going, Rennick, whether or not this turns out to have anything to do with your investigation. She looked at him hard. I'd tell you to sit this one out if I thought you'd actually listen. I don't think you would. So instead, I'm telling you to prep everything you've got. Because whatever's out there, it's bigger than a bramble stalker. And I don't like how close it's sitting to a case file someone 15 years ago apparently thought was worth burying. Kael looked toward the western horizon, where the black smudge of the Ashwood Deep sat exactly as it always had. Except, he realized now, watching it with new and uncomfortable attention, the smudge looked very slightly larger than it had that morning. All right, he said. Let's go find out what's actually in there. Chapter 49. Into the breach. The response team assembled faster than any expedition Kael had been part of yet. Halden and Tamsin leading, Yoren and a dozen guild reinforcements from neighboring districts filling out the combat line. And, over Holden's initial objection and everyone's eventual insistence, Bryce, Seraphin, and, for the first time, Wren, whose new chronicler aptitude Holden had reluctantly conceded might prove more useful in the field than anyone had originally planned for. If something's altering the boundary itself, Holden had said, we may need someone who can read what's actually written into the ground, not just what's fighting on top of it. Wren, terrified and thrilled in roughly equal measure, had not needed to be asked twice. The migrated boundary line, when they reached it, was unlike anything Kael had seen in 3 prior expeditions. The trees themselves seemed subtly wrong, bark patterns shifting in slow, deliberate spirals that made his eyes want to slide away from looking directly at them. And the ambient aether density, according to both his own communion and Wren's new residue ridding, was climbing steadily the closer they got to the boundary's newest edge. There, Seraphin said sharply, hand raised, the same gesture Kael remembered from the Long Watcher's approach. Something enormous, not moving toward us, just present. Like the forest is holding its breath around it. System notification. Beast detected. Unclassified. Estimated rank. Insufficient data. Exceeds standard sensing range. Warning. This reading is consistent with historical archive fragments describing pre-manifestation rift instability. Not a conventional beast. Recommend extreme caution. Do not approach the source directly. Ashen. What does that mean? Pre-manifestation. It means, operator, that whatever is causing the boundary to migrate may not yet exist as a beast at all. That we may be standing near something in the process of becoming one. The way a rift builds pressure before it tears. If that assessment is correct, this is not a fight we are equipped to win today. This is a fight to prevent from happening at all, if such a thing is even possible. Wren, kneeling at the edge of the strange, spiraling bark pattern, pressed her palm flat against the nearest tree, and went very still, the way she had over the old requisition slip weeks ago. "There's writing under this," she said, voice unsteady. "Not words. Something older than words. It's Kael. It's the same signature texture as the corrupted fragment in your evolution data. The one Ashen won't tell you about. Every calm, careful plan Halden had built for a controlled retreat and reinforcement request went, in that moment, very quietly out the window. "Confirm that," Halden said sharply. "Cabot, are you certain?" "I'm certain there's a connection. I'm not certain what it means." Wren pulled her hand back, breathing hard, staring at Kael with something between fear and fierce, urgent clarity. "But I don't think this is a coincidence anymore. I think whatever's out here is connected to you specifically. To your class. Maybe to Ashen." Kael felt the weight of every unanswered question of the past 4 months. His parents' deaths, Dre's buried signature, the corrupted warlord fragment, Ashen's stripped designation, settle, all at once, into a single, cold, certain shape. "Everyone falls back to the boundary line," Halden ordered, already moving. "Now. We reassess from a safe distance and figure out what we're actually looking at before anyone gets close enough to find out the hard way." Nobody argued, but as they retreated, Kael couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was stirring under that spiraled bark had already noticed them, and was, in no particular hurry at all, simply waiting to be ready. Chapter 50. What the Deep Remembers. They made camp well back from the migrated boundary, a full defensive perimeter set by Joran's reinforcements. And it was there, hours later, in the quiet, exhausted aftermath of a retreat that had felt more like a narrow escape than a tactical decision, that Ashen finally spoke again, quieter than Kael had ever heard it, almost hesitant. "Operator, I believe proximity to that location has restored a portion of my own corrupted memory. I would like permission to share it, though I want to be honest that I do not yet understand all of what I am recalling. Please. I was not built in a workshop, as I believed. Or, I was. But the workshop itself was constructed near this exact location, generations before the incident that buried me. There was a purpose to my original design that went beyond serving a single operator. I believe, and I want to stress the word believe, because the memory remains fragmentary, that I was one of several such constructs, built as part of a coordinated response to something the historical record I retain calls only the deep root. I do not know what that refers to. I do not know if it is the same presence Wren detected today. I strongly suspect it is." Kael sat with that, the campfire crackling low nearby, Wren asleep against Seraphine's shoulder a few feet away, Bryce keeping first watch with his spear across his knees, and felt the shape of a much larger story finally, uncomfortably, coming into focus. "The corrupted warlord fragment," he said slowly. "That's not just about me becoming strong enough to command an army, is it? It's about whatever this deep root actually is, about why a machinist with the ability to command legions would ever need to exist in the first place. I believe so, yes. I did not withhold the fragment from you to protect you from a title, operator. I withheld it because I suspected, without proof, that learning it too early might mean learning what it was for. And I did not want you racing toward a battle you weren't ready to fight, out of a sense of destiny rather than genuine readiness." A long pause. "I believe, now, that the timeline has accelerated beyond what either of us controls. I am sorry for that. I do not think delaying the truth any further serves you well. Then tell me, all of it. Whatever you actually remember, I will. But not tonight, operator. Not because I am withholding it again, but because what I retain is fragmentary, contradictory in places. And I do not want to hand you an incomplete map and let you mistake it for a complete one. Give me time to be certain of what I am telling you. A day, Perhaps 2. I promise you this is the last time I will ask you to wait. Kael looked out past the campfire, toward the dark, silent shape of the Ashwood Deep. Larger now than it had been that morning, patient and unhurried the way it had always been, and felt, for the first time since awakening day, not fear exactly, but the specific, clarifying weight of finally understanding that the story he'd been living was much bigger than one broken clock tower and one bad afternoon behind a market stall. Okay, he said quietly. 2 days. I can wait 2 days. Thank you, operator, for what it is worth. Whatever I am about to tell you, I want you to remember, first, everything you have already built without needing to know it. 28 badly named machines, a friend who reads secrets out of old paper. A town that finally learned to stop laughing. None of that becomes smaller just because the story turns out to be larger than we thought. Cunley, exhausted, watching the fire burn low, found that, somehow, impossibly, he believed it. Chapter 51. The shape of the war to come. They broke camp the next morning and returned to Ashenreach under Halden's orders. A full guild containment perimeter established around the migrated boundary in their place. Capital reinforcements already en route. The second ring closed to all but authorized personnel until further notice. It was, everyone agreed, the responsible decision. It didn't make the 2 days that followed feel any less like waiting for a held breath to finally release. Kael spent them the way he'd spent every hard stretch of the last 6 months. At the workbench, hands busy, mind working through the shape of things he couldn't yet fully see. Bryce ran drills with him in the mornings. Wren, still adjusting to the strange new weight of her chronicler sight, spent afternoons carefully practicing on old safe documents rather than anything from the deep. At Halden's firm insistence, Seraphine came by most evenings and mostly just sat with him, not filling the silence, which he'd come to understand was its own kind of company. System notification. Threshold reached. Blueprint synthesis Tier 2. Machine communion Tier 2. Sustained coordinated combat data logged. Drone sovereign. Tier 2. Tier 3. Class rank reassessed. Machinist, B rank, stable. Note: further rank growth is now gated behind qualitative combat data rather than raw aether volume. Recommend continued growth through meaningful engagement, not repetition. It came quietly, almost as an afterthought, buried in the middle of an otherwise ordinary evening's drill. And Kael, reading it over, found himself thinking less about the number attached to his class, and more about everything that had actually gotten him here. A clock tower that wouldn't chime right. A girl who'd left him with nothing but a receipt for 11 silver. A one-armed scrapyard keeper who'd never once laughed at him. A best friend who could now read secrets out of old paper. A rival who'd become something close to a friend. A noble girl who sat in comfortable silence instead of filling it. None of that showed up on a guild registry entry. All of it, Kael understood now, was the actual reason any of the registry entries existed at all. Ashen kept its promise on the evening of the second day, settling into the quiet of the scrapyard with the same careful, deliberate weight it had carried since the campfire. I am as certain as I am going to get, operator. I would like to tell you what I remember about the deep root, and about what warlord was always going to mean before this goes any further. I want to be honest. Once I tell you, there will not be an easy way to set it back down again. Are you ready? Kael set his tools aside, looked out toward the dark western tree line, larger now, patient, waiting the way it had always waited, and thought about everything he'd already survived to reach this exact, quiet moment. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. Tell me everything. Ashen did. It took the rest of the night, and it changed the shape of everything Kael thought he understood about his own class, his own family, and the dark, patient forest sitting 2 hours from his own front door. But that, like the rest of the story, is a conversation for another evening entirely. Chapter 52. The Deep Root. Kael asked Wren and Seraphine to be there when Ashen finally explained it properly, and neither of them hesitated for a second when he asked. If it's big enough that a machine's been sitting on it for weeks, Wren said, settling onto the workbench with the particular determined focus she'd carried since her own reawakening, then it's big enough that I want to hear it firsthand instead of getting a summary from you at breakfast. Then I will begin, Ashen said, once they'd all settled in the scrapyard's low evening light, and I will ask you to interrupt me whenever you need to. This is not a story that benefits from being delivered all at once. It started, Ashen explained, long before any guild registry, long before the current kingdom even had a name, with the observation, made by people whose records survive only in fragments, that rifts did not open entirely at random. They clustered, over centuries, around certain fixed points in the world, the way iron filings cluster around a hidden magnet. Most such points eventually went quiet. A very small number did not. The Ashwood Deep is one of those points, Kael said slowly, working it out loud. Not just a forest that beasts run to, a place rifts have always been drawn to.
Land Lieutenant Genhound.
Correct. The current theory, my own theory, reconstructed from fragmentary memory rather than confirmed record, is that beneath such points lies something that predates the rifts themselves. Not a beast, not a rift. Something the oldest surviving fragments call, without further elaboration, the deep root. I do not know what it fundamentally is. I know only that its presence appears to generate rift activity around it the way a heartbeat generates a pulse, and that, on a cycle no one fully understood even at the height of whatever civilization first studied it. The deep root periodically stirs closer to the surface, and rift activity in the surrounding region does not simply increase, it transforms. Beasts grow stronger, stranger, more coordinated, boundaries migrate, and eventually, if nothing intervenes, something manifests that the old fragments simply call an awakening event, on a scale far beyond anything a single hunter, or even an army of hunters, has ever been able to face alone. Forshendine, Seraphine, very quiet, very pale, finally spoke. You're saying my entire district has been sitting on top of one of these places? My whole life. My father's whole life. Yes, and I would guess, though I cannot confirm it, that House Alcairn's governorship of this district was not entirely coincidental. That some far older arrangement, long since forgotten even by the families who inherited it, once existed specifically to keep watch over a place like this. Wren, hands pressed flat against her own knees, looked up sharply. That's an enormous thing to just casually mention. I am aware. I told you this would not be a story that benefits from being delivered all at once. Shall I continue, or would you prefer we pause here for tonight? Kael looked at Wren, pale but steady, and Seraphine, working through the sudden reshaping of everything she thought she knew about her own family's purpose, and felt the weight of it settle onto all three of them at once, heavier for being shared. Continue, he said. I want to understand what machinists actually were before I lose my nerve and ask you to stop. Chapter 53. What machinists were for. An awakening event of that scale cannot be fought the way a single beast is fought. Ashen continued. It requires coordinated response on a scale no single warrior, however powerful, can provide alone. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of simultaneous points of engagement, sustained over days rather than minutes. The old fragments suggest that the machinist class did not arise naturally, the way most classes do. It was cultivated, deliberately, generations in advance of a predicted deep root cycle, specifically to produce operators capable of commanding a legion of constructs large enough to contain such an event until it subsided again. That's what the drone sovereign path actually is, Kael said quietly. Not a fighting style, a containment role, yes. And the title Warlord, I believe now, with far more confidence than I had before tonight, was never a title of conquest at all. It was given, historically, to whoever led such a containment effort successfully. A burden accepted, not a throne claimed. I withheld it from you for months, operator, because I did not want you racing toward glory that was never the point in the first place. Wren, working through it with the same careful precision she brought to old paperwork, frowned. If machinists were built specifically to handle this, why did the class just vanish? You said it disappeared from guild records 200 years ago. That's not that long after the last cycle, is it? That is the part of my memory I trust least, because it is also the part that appears to have been most deliberately damaged. Ashen's tone, already careful, went quieter still. What I can reconstruct suggests the last major containment effort succeeded. The deep root, wherever this occurred 200 years ago, was successfully contained, and the immediate crisis ended. What happened afterward is less clear. I believe the surviving machinists, and the knowledge of how to cultivate more of them, were deliberately suppressed rather than simply forgotten. I do not know by whom, with certainty, but I have a great deal of new suspicion, given everything Wren has already uncovered about a departmental seal that outranked a district commander. The scrapyard went very quiet. You think it's the same people, Seraphine said slowly. Whoever erased the machinist class 200 years ago. Whoever's been protecting Dre for 15. You think it's connected? I think an army capable of being commanded by a single operator is exactly the kind of power that would frighten whoever already holds power, regardless of the intention behind it. I think it is significantly easier to control a kingdom's response to rift activity if the one class built specifically to end a crisis on your own terms simply does not exist in living memory. And I think, operator, that whoever has spent 2 centuries maintaining that arrangement did not appreciate discovering, 15 years ago, that a research expedition studying rift residue patterns near a live deep root site was getting close enough to notice something they'd worked very hard to keep buried. Kael sat with that for a long moment. His parents' deaths, Dre's transfer, the corrupted fragment, all of it resolving, finally into a single, cold, coherent shape. They didn't just deny an oversight request, he said. They killed 2 researchers and lost track of their own son for 15 years. To protect a 200-year-old secret about a class they were afraid of. That is my current, best-supported theory, yes. I am sorry, operator. I know that is not a small thing to be told in a single evening. Wren reached over and took his hand without a word, and Seraphine, on his other side, did the same. And Kael, surrounded by the only people who'd earned the right to be there for this, found that he could, somehow, still breathe through it. Then I guess we'd better find out exactly who they are, he said, before they finish whatever they were trying to keep quiet in the first place. Chapter 54. Aftermath of the Truth. Nobody slept much that night, and by the next morning the scrapyard had turned, without anyone quite deciding it should, into something closer to a war room. We can't take this to Halden Hole, Wren said, pacing in front of the workbench with a stack of her own careful notes. Not the deep root part, not yet. If she reports it up the normal chain, and the undersigned, we are not calling them that, Kael said. I'm calling them that. It's accurate, and it's dramatic, and I've earned dramatic after last night. Wren kept pacing. If she reports it through channels that Dre's old departmental seal still has any reach into, we've just told the people covering this up exactly how much we already know. We need her to have this information without it becoming a piece of paper that travels anywhere dangerous. She trusts us, Seraphine said. I think you tell her carefully, in person, and you let her decide how to protect it from there. She's earned that much. Bryce, arriving with his spear and immediately sensing that something considerably larger than a training session had happened overnight, took one look around the room and said, with unusual bluntness for a boy who'd spent most of his life avoiding anything that looked like emotional complexity, "Somebody's going to have to explain this to me slowly, because I can already tell I missed something enormous." They did, over the course of the morning, in careful pieces, and Bryce, to his credit, absorbed it with much more steadiness than Kael expected, right up until the moment Wren mentioned the deep roots' cyclical waking pattern, at which point he set his spear down very deliberately and said, "So what you're telling me is there's an ancient world-ending thing under the forest I patrol twice a week?" "Broadly, yes." "Cool, cool, cool, cool." Bryce sat down hard on an overturned crate. "I'd like it noted that I've had an extremely normal year up until about 4 minutes ago." "Welcome to the club," Wren said. "We meet informally, mostly in this scrapyard. Snacks are inconsistent, despite everything, the weight of it, the fear still sitting cold in Kael's chest." He found himself laughing, short and real, and watched the tension in the room ease just slightly with it, the way it always seemed to whenever Wren decided a moment needed one. Holden listened to the careful, edited version that evening without interrupting once, her expression going through several distinct stages of controlled alarm before settling, finally, into something grim and determined. "I'm not filing this through standard channels," she said, once Kael finished. "Not yet. Marrow gets it directly, same as before, and only after I've verified there's no way it passes through anyone connected to the Talent Division's Resource Allocation Office on the way." She looked at all of them, Kael, Wren, Seraphine, Bryce, gathered in the outpost's back room like a small, unlikely council of war. "I want to be honest with you. If even a fraction of what you're describing is real, this stopped being a provincial matter the moment that boundary line moved. I don't know yet how far up this actually goes. I don't know who else might already be watching us because of it. So what do we do?" Kael asked. "We keep doing exactly what we've been doing," Holden said, carefully, "together, and we stop treating this like something we can solve quietly in a scrapyard, because I don't think it's that small anymore." She looked at Kael directly, something almost gentle underneath the grim resolve. "You didn't ask for any of this, Rennick. I want that said out loud, at least once, whatever this turns into. You didn't go looking for a war. It found you anyway." Kael thought about a broken clock tower, and a resonance lamp's sputtering brown-gray light, and a boy nobody in Ashenreach had once bothered to take seriously. "No," he agreed, "but I've got people now who'll stand in it with me. That's more than I had 6 months ago. I'll take it." Ponage. He slept better that night than he had any right to. He might not have if he'd known that 300 miles away, in a capital office with a 3-ringed seal on the door, someone had just finished reading a report with his name in it, and had already begun drafting a response.